lots of people involved with these studies that are never mentioned, and three in our case, Amy Oden, Heidi Adams, and Nancy Beecher, were all graduate students that worked on this project over time. So they are as important to us getting this data together as the major investigators. Basically, we know that extinction is a natural process. We know we've lost species over time. The fossil record is there. We are approximately 1,000 times higher rate of losing species now than we were then. And as we look to the future, we can expect that rate of loss to continue. The question then is, can we, or with our practices, sustainable practices or organic systems, contribute more to the protection of biodiversity? And more importantly, can we measure these impacts and help the organic farmers invest their dollars wisely in these conservation practices? Whoop. It is slow, isn't it? This is results from one of the early studies that made some comparisons between bird abundance and richness on organic and non-organic fields. And one caveat to this study there, while the organic fields and the non-organic or conventional fields, they had the same amount of biodiversity in vegetation surrounding it. In other words, they had the same vegetative structure in adjoining fields or non-crop areas and so forth. So the differences we're seeing are attributable solely to the practices, or we think solely to the practices that are associated with organic systems. So this is quite positive. We followed this up most recently as part of the overall study that Liz explained when we started off, and started looking at the biodiversity associated with three different scales, or landscape scales. One, the local field scale, then a smaller one called the field scale, which we don't report here. Local scale is basically the farm itself. The landscape scale is everything out to about 5,000 meters, which is about 3 miles. So a swath around the organic farm in 3 miles in diameter. If we look at the graph on the left, we see that some species respond, and look at the bottom, percent of block grasslands, these are alfalfa, these are large patches of grass or alfalfa. We see that the grassland sparrows responded well to more and more grassland being available on a farm. Similarly, the dick thistle also responded well or positively to more and more alfalfa. So these two species are encouraged by having larger tracts of grass or alfalfa. In contrast, the horned lark responded negatively to increases either in alfalfa or grassland. And so what that says is it likes more diversity in its habitat, more non-crop areas that may not be dominated by grass or alfalfa. On the other side of the image, there is a landscape scale graph that goes out to 5,000 meters, so percent of grassland within that surrounding area. And here we see that the western meadowlark and the ring-necked pheasants both respond to more at the landscape scale. So an individual farmer activities on a particular field or on a particular farm don't necessarily have a positive influence on these two species. Collectively, people in the area, farmers in the area, have a very big response to these or impact on these species. And here's some other shrubland birds. These tend to be species that like more diverse habitat. They don't require the large open areas of grassland that the other species we were talking about. So you can see a number of different species, and I won't go over these, but these are all showing positive responses both at the percent grass cover and the local diversity, or Shannon index, which is just a measure of how different types of vegetation in the area, how different the non-crop areas are. And so both of those respond fairly well to those kind of things. And if we go back and look at the diversity up here in the aerial shot, this is one of the farms. You can see the diversity, especially in the farm itself. different fields, different grassland areas, different vegetation types. That's what we're talking about. So when we're really looking at is, while farmers are interested and always like to know what birds are out there, they want to know what the benefits are to them of having these extra birds out here. How do I manage my ecosystem? How do I create conditions that promote the biodiversity, either planned biodiversity, which is your crop rotation, or the associated biodiversity that's in those other areas that we don't farm. And so these then are basis for what we call ecosystem services. And these are the things that the ecosystem provides to us. And they can be broken down in a number of different categories, and we'll get to that in a minute. But ecosystem services include things like clean water, clean air that we take for granted, areas of riparian buffers that clean up water that runs off a field, crop borders that clean up runoff. These are all the kinds of things we're talking about. So what we started with were characteristics or criteria that are important to estimating what we might consider to be what is a healthy farm, if you will. We use bird diversity because that's something we have a lot of data on. And we use crop yield since this is really the basis of economic return to the producer. We went to him from those two starting points. We went out and talked to a number of all of our cooperators on the organic system and looked for and asked them for suggestions as to what else they think is important. And there we are. So crop richness might be something that they would identify for us. Livestock richness, speaking how many different types of livestock do they have, how many different crops do they have. Both of these deal with their rotation and production systems. From ecosystem service standpoint of view, we were looking at how much of the farm is in crop and how much is in non-crop areas, how much is in borders, how much is in riparian systems, and so forth, or windbreaks. We looked at ecosystem richness, and on the off chance that they had a rare or endangered species, we wanted to know that. None of our producers had any of those rare or endangered species. On ecosystem services, we can break that down into three categories. Provisioning, which is basically what we produce, the crop yield, and marketing opportunities. Where can I market that crop? What kind of variety do I have? Do I have options in terms of marketing? Regulating are things like soil and water conservation. And the cultural things, well, how satisfied are you with your operation? Does it give you a good life? How long have you been at it? These are the criteria then that we collected from information we collected from the producers. And so then with that, we were able to rate different farms in a biodiversity score and an ecosystem service score. And here are two organic farms. The one on the left has more diversity, an index value of 90, versus the one on the right with an index value of 75. And looking at those two aerial photos, you can see the difference in the landscape, vegetation types that are out there, the crops that are out there, the different conditions of the field. The one on the right has several large fields that are fairly uniform, homogeneous. The one on the left has a lot more differences or heterogeneity in it, and thus the different index values. We also rated one of those. We all talked about the organic side at the Agriculture Research and Development Center. And this is one of the sections that's located there. This is the agroforestry section. The organic system that people have been talking about is this center one right through here. And so we rated it along with its surrounding habitat. And again, we came up with index values that were much higher in most cases. The biodiversity index was about the same. Where it fell down is that there are no livestock on this particular research area. When we look at the ecosystem services, it fell down because of the market opportunities. The university markets under a very rigid system and can't always look for the best opportunities. Basically, we take it to the local elevator. in conclusion, basically, things of value to us is habitat diversity. This is the thing that came across loud and clear. The more diversity you have in your habitat, the healthier that ecosystem is going to be. These are three other systems that we looked at for one of our companion studies. These are all field windbreaks that looked at how many or how far away from a particular habitat, in this case a riparian system, in these two cases windbreak systems along the edge of a field, how far away will birds forage into that field.
Muted.
And so here we look at the responses of the avian foraging sites. In other words, how far out can we expect birds to be predators on various crop insects? And so you can see quite a difference. These are ones that feed within 20 meters of the edge, and these are all fairly shy birds, ones that don't really care for people. Some of the other ones are much more ferocious, if you will, and much more daring, is maybe a little bit too personalized. But if you look at some of these, there are some of the species, the blue jay, the oriole, the robin, kingbird in particular, forage just about anywhere, and they're relatively unaffected by us, if you will, and so they will forage farther out into the fields. The kingbird in particular is one that really has a lot of promise as a predator for various crop pests. John Quinn is now a faculty member at Furman University, and really should be the one
Unmuted.
this talk. He did most of this work, and his dissertation that came together for this particular thing. He's got some contact information there and a couple of key papers for those who really want to follow up on the details, because we certainly gave you more of the general highlights and not much of the real gory details.